please welcome Douglas Rushkoff.
Thanks. I've got 18 minutes, 17:55, so I'm going to be brief. What I want to tell you is that the current global financial crisis is the web's fault, that it's a good thing, and that it's really the arresting of a 400 or 500 year process through which value has been extracted from real people and companies unfairly and unproductively, and that if we seize this opportunity, if we seize the day, then we can make pretty much everything great. And if we don't, they will recover and make us miserable for another few centuries. So if you got that, I'm done. Let me try to back that up. This became clear to me in around 1999 when I got a phone call from a guy who said he was the CEO of an American television manufacturer. And he wanted his company to develop a communication strategy that was less Saatchi and more Craigslist. And by that, he meant, in his own way, that he wanted to try to become a transparent business. He wanted to be more net-friendly. He wanted to have interaction rather than just TV commercials. And he probably also thought it would be cheaper. I asked him, I knew full well at that point that there were no longer any American television manufacturers in existence. So I kind of played with him on the phone a while, and I said, so do you actually make television sets? He said, well, no, we outsourced the television manufacturing to Korea about a decade ago. Well, do you design the television sets? He goes, well, yes. Well, no, actually, there's a firm in San Francisco that designs the television sets for us. He didn't do the marketing of the television sets. That went to one of the Omnicom companies. So I asked him, so what do you actually do? What does your company do? The company had no chance of becoming transparent Craigslist. They can't open the windows and interact with clientele because there was no one in the company to interact with that clientele. Right? There was just a balance sheet, a spreadsheet, and a few people outsourcing activities to other companies. The calls I would get, the companies I would go to, would leave me with the impression that the thing that we are doing best at is incompetence. Right? That we are consciously, actively incompetent. Our companies do not do the things that they do. Now, moving to become a transparent company is easy if there's something happening in the company, right? If you are good at what you do, if you have, and there's actual companies that don't, if you have people in your company who work in the industry that your company is a part of, it's much easier to become transparent, right? If there's activity in your company that relates to the business that you're in, it's much easier to show that to people than if there's not. And once there is, it's easy. The whole trick to becoming transparent and a transparently functioning business is just develop a culture that's dedicated to the thing that you do. Whether it's a TV company or a tea company or a soft drink company, as long as you've got great people at doing that thing in the company, then you can just open the gates. Right? Then what you end up with is, instead of a hierarchy with management at the top, you end up with more of a mandala with competency in the middle. And everyone wants to get further and further into that competency. Apple's kind of got that going on, where you feel like, whether it's true or not, you feel like Steve Jobs is the sort of creative center from which these ideas are emanating. And the closer you are to him, the closer you are to the creative center. And that goes all the way out right through customers and suppliers. Right? Your customer is just right outside that last ring of the mandala. Your customer, your most enthusiastic customer, is just your fledgling employee, right? That's a semi-permeable membrane. I mean, if you want to know how to do that, if you have a company that actually does something, just call Jeff Dawkes or Peter Kim, call someone they can do that. That's easy to do. And it's not a distraction from core competence to become a transparent company, a web-based, open, sort of internet-friendly social company. It actually forces you to be competent. Right? In the old days, when you're going to give a whole bunch of your budget to Omnicom to do ads for you, that's money that's coming from R&D, right, on some level. It's money that's coming from your innovation to build the myth around your product. Right? For Keebler, it means taking money away from cookie design and creating this myth of elves who bake the cookies in a hollow tree, right? Which is not an actual product attribute, it turns out. That's the myth around the product. So I wrote this book, which is the one before this. See, I'll advertise. I wrote this book. I have some free ones here. I believe in abundance. Does anyone want this? I'll leave it here. After the talk, just take it if this part of the talk is interesting to you. I decided to find out how did business become so generic, right? And what I saw, of course, was that we did spreadsheet sort of Harvard Business School style management, where instead of focusing on the fun or the creativity in a business, we were focusing on the ledger and outsourcing things. And we ended up thinking of generic management as pure business, right? The ideal was to actually get off the factory floor into the office where you no longer do a real thing, right? Where you get higher and higher into some sort of financial realm, right? A management position. And it got so bad, I remember the day that the last CEO of The Gap, the one who almost brought the company down, the day that he got the job, he did a press conference on CNBC where he said, "I've never worked a day in the garment industry." And he said it proudly. And I remember thinking, what would it be like to work at a company where the guy who's now the CEO isn't just inexperienced in your industry, but is proud of it, as if to say his relationship with Sarah Jessica Parker to get her to be in an ad is more important than getting the 18-month turnaround from design to putting something in the stores, shrunken down to compete with Zara and H&M. So I wanted to know, how did that happen? How did management and business become generic? And that's really when I started to write this book, which is a galley, this book called Life, Inc. I realized that most corporations had become holding companies, right? That they were no longer really companies that did things, that they were names on debt, right? And the thing the company did was really the myth through which they acquired more debt. These were companies that, from our perspective, are companies that went through their IPO, right? Companies where the original creative founders had already exercised their exit strategies and left and sold it to the banks or sold it to the public through IPO. So these businesses were already literally sold out. And they were stories, they promoted stories to support their debt and to get more levels of debt, and were really focused on speculative investment rather than real commerce. Right? The object of the game is to dress up the company so that you can keep reselling it at greater and greater valuations. Sometimes you need to support that with sales, but you can create an artificial boost in sales through one means or another, or an artificial increase in the spreadsheet by firing a bunch of people. And I realized that this speculative perspective on business, as opposed to an actual one, this idea that my company is what it is worth at this moment for sale, rather than it's worth what it does or what it can do or what it provides, that this perspective on the world had been internalized by real people. Right? I got mugged on Christmas Eve in Park Slope in front of my apartment. And I posted on the nice lefty Park Slope parents list where I had gotten mugged. It's sort of like the Berkeley parents list. This is good, crunchy folk, or so I thought. The first 2 emails I received on Christmas Eve after I had been mugged at gunpoint were, "How dare you post where you got mugged? Do you realize what that does for the property values on our block? You know, you, Rushkoff, as a renter, don't have anything at stake in doing that." So these people were more concerned about the moment-to-moment asset value of their home than they were making their neighborhood safer and actually having a more valuable home in the long term. And this kind of behavior then begets more behavior of that sort, right? We get desocialized further. So I wanted to trace back, where did this come from? And it really traces back to two fundamentally false assumptions about our world that are accepted as pre-existing conditions of reality, but are really just closed source code written by a few people long ago for agendas that have nothing to do with us and who have long since left the building. And we don't even know that it's code, much less that the code can be changed. It's really two fundamental institutions and their supporting myths. The first one is corporations, and the notion that corporations promote free market capitalism, that they promote free market competition, where they don't. Right? Corporations were actually invented to prevent free market competition. And the second is that currency, well, that this stuff that we think of as that this is money, really would be it. That this is money. This is not money. This is a money. This is a kind of money with embedded values. This is a program, right? And there are other programs. But the myth is that money, that our currency was created to promote transactions between people, to promote circulation, and it wasn't. It was actually created to prevent transactions between people. Corporations are about what? Corporations are monopolies. That's quite simply what they are. Kings were losing power in the late Middle Ages. The aristocracy was going down. The rising merchant class was coming up. What do? Use the last vestige of power we have, lawmaking, to declare this company a chartered monopoly. So Joe, you can have all the corn dealing. Pete, you can have the West Indies. Sam, you can have America. By granting chartered monopolies to particular companies, kings got an investment, they got shares in the company, and they got the undying loyalty of those strong companies. That's what they were for. Chartered monopolies worked to prevent local people from extracting value for themselves, from exchanging value. This is why we had the American Revolution. Remember, colonists could grow cotton, but they couldn't sell it. They couldn't make clothes out of it. Colonists could grow cotton, but they had to sell it to the British East India Trading Company. British East India Trading Company brought it back to England on boats, where another company, another chartered corporation, made the clothes, and then British East India Company sent it back to America, where American colonists could buy clothes. It was against the law to create value for one another. Right? You had to do it through a corporation. That's what corporations were for. Centralized currency came up because most towns in late Middle Ages Europe, most towns had their own currency, and it worked the opposite way. Local currencies generally worked. You would work on the farm, you'd bring your oats to the grain store, and you would get a receipt for the amount of oats that you brought in. Then you could tear up this receipt and trade it as money for other stuff from other people, and they knew what it was worth. This money actually lost value over time because some of the oats would be lost to rats or to spoilage. So what did people do with it? They spent it as quickly as possible. No one wanted to be left holding it. They kept reinvesting. Women were taller in late Middle Ages England than they are even to today. People worked less. They ate more. They had so much extra money, they built cathedrals. They called this the First Renaissance. The cathedrals of late Middle Ages Europe were not paid for by the Vatican. They were paid for by towns looking for ways to invest their abundant capital in the future. And of course they created these great, and they meant it, these great tourist attractions. Now today, corporations and centralized currency are seen as it, right? We work for corporations, we invest in corporations, we do everything through corporations. And I got 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So I'm trying to figure out how to get right to the meat of the end. We all understand how banks work, right? Banks issue money by lending it, right? So if you're a company and you need money to start up your big company, you start out in debt, right? The rate at which you have to produce goods has nothing to do with supply and demand or the needs of people. It has to do with your debt structure, right? The growth of your corporation depends on the interest rates that you're paying to your investors or to your bank. And that's where we are today, those two legacies. Now, the internet breaks this. It breaks down the whole thing. First, because with the internet you can't hide, right? It's transparent, it breaks myths. Second, because of the dot-com crash, right? The dot-com bubble really is what we're experiencing today. This is the crash. The dot-com bubble led to all of this more capital, all this more currency being printed and put into investment. When it crashed, that money needed somewhere to go. So where did it go? Into another asset class, real estate. And it made real estate more expensive than real people could afford it. So the money's looking for somewhere to go. Finally, the thing that the web did, Web 2.0 in particular, that's so beautiful, is it allows people to create value on the periphery again. It allows people to create value and exchange value without going through centralized corporations, without going through the middle again. Furthermore, central bank borrowing is no longer required. You don't need a lot of money to do a truly great startup. You don't need the VC. The only reason you take the VC is if you're going to go Ponzi with it, right? And try to get out. And it's a business model, but it's a different one. So banks have resorted to a Ponzi scheme mode, and now they're crashing and dying. Right? Because not just because they went Ponzi scheme, but because they were so stupid they actually bought shares in their own Ponzi schemes. That's what happened. They forgot, right? It was the children of the original bankers. So what I'm looking at now, and the reason I'm hopeful, I think that currency itself is being reevaluated in the context of a free market ecology. PayPal tried. PayPal, those guys were smart. They tried. They had to change their business plan. The banks came down on them because they were going to do the service for free and just take the float. And banks said, oh, no, don't do that. That's our monopoly. Nah, don't mess there. But there have been local currencies that have worked. In Japan, during the long recession, they created elder care dollars. Right? People had time but no jobs and no money. So what they did was they would care for an old person in the town where they lived. They would accrue. They would earn money into existence, earn these elder care dollars. Then they could spend them on someone else taking care of their relatives far away. And even though the recession, it kind of ended, people still prefer using that as their health care. They find it's actually better care. And we don't just need, local currencies are easy. There's a restaurant in my town that wanted to expand to a second location. And he couldn't borrow any more money from the bank because the bank was going out of business. So we invested instead. The restaurant's called Comfort. If you put in $100, you get $120 to spend at the restaurant. And we're all going to spend it. We all go there. So we get a 20% return on our investment right away, and he gets money cheaper than he can get it from the bank. It's very easy to create currencies that are earned into existence instead of lent into existence. I have emails to Craig Newmark to do Craig bucks. It doesn't have to be local. Craig bucks. Can you imagine people doing stuff for Craig bucks instead? That you earn Craig bucks by porting someone else's stuff around, and then we build an alternative economy that way. Because the printing press modeled currency that we still use today, it's printing press modeled. Even if we're doing digital transactions, it's still modeled on the printing press. It's a business model based in scarcity. Right? In the late Middle Ages, people had a currency based on the abundance of what they could grow. Kings made that currency illegal. You kill people if you use it. And created instead a scarce currency based in gold and the imprimatur of the king, coin of the realm. This is at the heart of what everybody's talking about. We talk about it in the book industry. It's really easy to say, oh, well, books are scarce, but digital is free, and that's why the book industry is going to go away. Think of it, instead of books, think of it as money. Right? We're using a printing press currency based in artificial scarcity in a digital age characterized by abundance. And that is why the scarcity banking lending model doesn't work in a Web 2.0 universe. Of course the economy has cognitive dissonance. But that's why this is our chance. It really is our chance. If we walk the walk that we're talking. Right? This is the opportunity for a net industry run by people looking to create value sustainably for one another, to actually make a living, which is not a disrespectable thing, to make a living rather than to cash out. To build and keep businesses rather than selling them off. Because once you sell, honestly, you are working for the bank, or at least your company is. The fun is over. And that, with my conclusion, I'll say that is the booby prize. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.